it's this crazy time that we're in. But we're just looking at the whole thing completely wrong. You know, we have old ideas, bad leaders. And it's, again, that thing where truth is there, but it hasn't percolated all the way through. So we're in this transition period that's, you know, it's ugly right now in a lot of ways, but you can see the horizon. You see that sun poking through the clouds, and you know that truth just has a different resonance. It has a different frequency, and it's adopted eventually. You know, it's only, you know, and there'll be people who still think there's flat Earth and whatever. There'll be some resistance to truth. There'll be some resistance to truth, but for most of us, it has that frequency and that resonance where it's going to eventually win. And that's what gives me a lot of confidence.
I'm just kidding. Eddie said he doesn't believe the Earth's flat.
He does post a lot of pictures of the fucking planet.
He does.
Says
he
real
posted a whole video the other day about some dude who was arguing for the flat Earth in the weirdest way possible. But it's what I was talking about before that I don't know if I articulated it so well, is that when you look at our culture and look at society, and then you think back to the time of Xerxes and all the crazy shit that was going on 1,000 years ago or 2,000 years ago. That's not that long ago, man.
No.
It's not. It seems like it is. But like when I was listening to Dan Carlin's Hardcore History, and he was talking about World War I, and he does this amazing, I think it's a 5-part series on World War I, and it sinks in like, Jesus Christ, that was 100 years ago. Like, that's nothing. That is fucking nothing. Like, that is so recent, and the world is so different now than 100 years ago, and 100 years before that, so different. And then, you know, he had this piece on the Mongols 1,000 years ago. Well, not much different. You know, it's like, I mean, not much different in terms of the relationship between then and now. It's so recent, so recent.
Yeah,
1,000 years is nothing in the scope of the world.
Right.
You know,
and then you back it out to, you know, some of Graham Hancock's theories that he puts out in Magicians, which seem to make a lot of sense, that we'd reached heightened states before and then gotten kind of wiped out and restarted. How many times did that happen?
Yeah. Well,
how many times did we restart? You know, hit the reset button.
100%. With Randall Carlson's evidence, with the two of them together, they really sort of both provided the missing pieces that each other need. And if you've never heard those podcasts, they're some of my all-time favorite podcasts, the Randall Carlson ones and the Graham Hancock ones, and the one time that I had the two of them on together, which was just a fucking epic meeting of the minds. The world has most likely experienced some cataclysmic disasters, most likely due to asteroidal impacts, and it was most likely the cause of the end of the Ice Age, and also the collapse of whatever civilization was available then, and the rebirth of what we're seeing now as ancient history. So when we look back at things 6,000-7,000 years ago, we think, wow, this is the dawn of civilization. Not so fast.
Right.
This is the dawn of this current era of civilization before we get hit again.
Yeah.
And that is entirely possible.
But it's really interesting to explore that and give yourself some perspective on
where they had
from.
Sort of a parallel development in terms of their achievement, but in a different way. Like Egypt. To this day, we can't build those fucking buildings the way they did it. And people could say, oh, we certainly could. 2,500,000 stones that weigh between 2 and 80 tons. If you put 10 of those a day in place, it would take you 600 plus years to make the Great Pyramid of Giza. That's how fucking crazy that building is. So if you say we could build that today, good luck, bitch.
You need more faith in the unions, Joe.
Well, if you're
unions
off,
will get it done.
If you're off by literally like a quarter of a centimeter, you're fucked by the time you get to the top.
Yeah.
Think of that. Like, if you're lopsided one way or the other, by the time you get to the top, you're fucking doomed. There's some interesting theories about how they did it, but none of them really sink in. All we definitely know is it took an incredible level of sophistication, and it was done. The most recent it could have happened was 2,500 BC, which is just nuts.
Yeah.
Nuts. They were so smart.
And it's not just Egypt. You could go to Peru. You know, I think I've shared that photo of me and Ollantaytambo, the same one that Crazy Tsoukalos shared as well. You go there and you look at the way the stones fit together and look at how the things are carved out, and it just doesn't make any sense.
The size of the stones. Like, what the fuck
really,
did you do? How did you do this?
Yeah.
God, I would give so much to see the construction of the pyramids. If there was like one time in history, if you could take that sort of a time capsule and go back and watch, for me, it would be ancient Egypt. for me, for sure. I would want to see how those crazy fuckers were walking around with their wacky goth makeup on and weird golden robes and making those hieroglyphs. And God, what a fascinating, weird era in the development of the human mind and of culture. If you think of what they were capable of doing and what they did accomplish over who knows how many, we're sort of going back trying to piece it all together. But one of the things that Graham Hancock and even more importantly, John Anthony West has a new series apparently, Magical Egypt 2. I haven't seen it yet, but Magical Egypt 1 is just fucking mind-blowing when he goes into great detail about the different construction methods from the old kingdom to the new kingdom, and that he points out that this is most likely evidence of a different era of construction, and not just a different era, but different by 10,000 years maybe, and that the hieroglyphs on the inside of some of the pyramids, which dictate, or rather which go over and depict the various pharaohs throughout the different stages of Egypt, they go back 30,000 years. But what modern Egyptologists choose to do is to say, well, all those guys, that was all fiction.
Yeah.
Like back when anything more than 6,000 years ago is just fiction. Like, okay, says who, bitch? Says who? Okay,
right.
How do you know? Like, it's crazy enough that they did this 4,500 years ago. That's just crazy enough, okay? But it's no more crazy to think that they were doing it 30,000 years before that. Like, this whole thing is this majestic sort of monument to human innovation in a weird way that's not like what we do now with cement and steel and glass and asphalt roadways and fiber optic cables. No, they had some other thing going on.
And I think Graham makes that kind of a cool point. Like, they were building something specifically for permanence.
Yeah.
Like, why? Why did they want it to extend through time? Because all of our shit, another ice age hits and, the ice moves in and starts grinding everything. It basically grind most of what we have to dust anyways, But they were creating these big stone blocks, these things that were harder, that would withstand the test of time. And why? And that's kind of an interesting speculative part of Graham's theory. But what seems concrete is that there was these cultures advanced and decided to do it. Now, why gets into the speculation, but Göbekli Tepe and Gunung Padang and Indonesia and then Egypt and all of these places. Really, really super interesting. And interesting to imagine, if the flood did kill off most of that civilization and they kind of just settled in different places, and the accounts, just one of the best books I think ever written was Magicians. And
well, when they burned the Library of Alexandria, man, did they do the human race a massive disservice. We could have learned so much. Could have learned so much about why the ancient Greeks would go to Egypt to learn shit and to engage in psychedelic rituals. Yeah. It's funny that the greatest minds of their time would go specifically to Egypt to engage in these psychedelic rituals and to learn from the Egyptians. The greatest minds of our time today will mock psychedelics. It's kind of fascinating. There's so few in terms of like mainstream recognized scholars will even entertain the possibility that there could be some beneficial aspects to engaging in ritualistic hallucinogenics.
Well, all of academia is about defending to the death your own structure of information. And
there's a really interesting documentary that's, funny enough, narrated by Charlton Heston about the mystery of the Sphinx. I think it was on NBC at the time, but one of the weirder moments in it was when Robert Schoch, the geologist from Boston University, and John Anthony West presented this evidence that the Sphinx most likely was far older than 2500 BC because of the erosion in the Sphinx compound that could only be attributed to water. I've heard arguments against it being water and it being wind and sand, but they don't fly. It seems like they're working to try to make that a wind and sand erosion, whereas it's pretty obvious the fissures, the way it's cut into it makes total sense that it was water. But the only thing that could make it water would be that it had to be before 9,000 BC, because 9,000 B or 7,000 BC, 9,000 years ago, one of those. Somewhere a lot longer than 2500 BC. And the argument when it was presented to this archaeologist, he was laughing. Well, what culture was around 10,000 years ago that could have done this? What culture? Meanwhile, now we have those cultures. Now we have real evidence of Göbekli Tepe, which is 12,000 years old. We have real evidence of all sorts of weird shit that they didn't know. I mean, now they're finding evidence of human beings in North America 14,000 years ago. They're finding woolly mammoth bones with clear indications that they were slaughtered by human beings, like cuts on the bones. And they're like, oh, Jesus. Like, people, we don't know. We just don't know. We don't know what the fuck happened between 10,000 years ago when the Ice Age ended and today. There's just so much weirdness, and we definitely don't know what the fuck happened before that. Before that, there is a lot of unfilled pieces in that puzzle.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's like it really is the greatest mystery of all. You know, it's like the greatest mystery novel that I've ever read was Graham Hancock's book. It's just you're uncovering something that was real and trying to piece together the puzzle. And in 20 years, from fingerprints to magicians, all the new evidence that have come has really supported his initial evidence, which was pretty good in fingerprints. But then by magicians, it's like fucking overwhelming. You know?
He was just so openly mocked by a lot of people that didn't want him to be right or didn't want anyone to achieve any sort of notoriety by having some sort of an innovative idea. I mean, they pushed back on him so hard. But the stuff that Randall Carlson presents, like these various craters that they've uncovered all throughout the world that indicate asteroidal impacts as recently as 5,000 years ago and deep into 12,000, 10,000, the nuclear glass they found all throughout Asia and Europe that indicates massive meteor impacts somewhere in the neighborhood of 11, 12,000 years ago. Yeah. I mean, it all makes sense. It all fills in like, well, what could have caused? Oh, well, that caused it. Oh, that fucked a lot of shit up for sure. I mean, if you look at that nuclear glass, that's the same kind of shit that they find when they do nuclear tests. And they find it all throughout Europe, all throughout Asia, which indicates that they literally got bombed on by the universe.
Yeah, the circumstantial evidence is just mounting and mounting. Yeah. And it's interesting, you know, we hear about these things that are like myths. And one of the ones that I saw that I'm not sure if it's true or not, but it's an interesting take on what actually happened to the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah. Because in the Bible, you know, God rained fire upon and burned all these homosexuals and sodomists and people that sounded like they're having a great party. And, you know, what they were suggesting is that it was a meteor that burned up in the atmosphere, and it created this flashpoint effect, which they know can happen. It created this flashpoint effect where instantly the ground temperature reached several hundred or 1,000 degrees or whatever. So it was like this instant, everybody's just fucking crispied, you know? And how do you explain that? Other than an angry God.
Yeah.
Like, it doesn't make sense. You know, you have no idea. So these stories and myths get passed down, and they're like, well, why did that happen? Well, I don't know, man. I went to Sodom, and there's some crazy shit going on.
Butt fucking. Can't be butt fucking.
So after the fact, you make up these stories like, man, of course. Yeah. You know, that's why it happened. It was just an unlucky party town. It was Cancun.
It was hard to do. I mean, that was hard to explain back then, so people went to that. But today, in 2016, with the information that we have, with all the evidence that we have, there are still people that are inclined to go towards some sort of a biblical version of the reality in which we live in. Like this is today. When you're talking about 7,000, 8,000 years ago, like God only knows what it would have been like. It was probably straight out of Game of Thrones. Mm-hmm. Like the reaction that people had to any sort of a natural disaster. It had to be the will of the gods. It had to definitely be something that our own actions had caused. And so when someone would stand up, like the old dirty dude on Game of Thrones who wants everybody to repent.
Oh, yeah.
What's his name?
High Sparrow?
High Sparrow, yeah. When that type of person would stand up and tell the people, that this is because you have angered God and it will come again if you keep doing that. And God forbid, strange use of words, but another meteor shower. I mean, meteor showers, oftentimes they come like one after another. And then he says this and then it happens again. He's right. I told you, God is angry.